Let's rewind to 1968. Four guys, Jimmy Page, Robert Plant, John Paul Jones, and John Bonham walked into the Atlantic Records office. They weren't rock legends yet. They were just a brand new band with a name barely anyone had heard, Led Zeppelin. But they didn't walk in with their heads down. They walked in with Peter Grant. Now Peter Grant wasn't your average music manager. He was huge, like WWE wrestler huge, and he had a personality to match. He didn't ask for things, he demanded them. That day, Peter Grant looked the execs at Atlantic straight in the face and told them what he wanted. A $200,000 advance, full creative control, 15% royalties, and, get this, full ownership of the master recordings. For a brand new band, the execs at Atlantic thought it was a joke. Nobody got that kind of deal, especially not rookies. But Grant wasn't joking. He stood up towering over everyone in the room and made it clear, take the deal, or he walks. And here's the kicker, he already had backup offers. He wasn't bluffing. Atlantic folded. They gave Led Zeppelin everything they wanted. And just like that, history changed. Most artists at the time were getting ripped off left and right. Led Zeppelin? They walked out with a deal that would make them millions and give them total freedom. People always talk about Peter Grant like he was just a big scary guy who yelled at promoters. But that's only part of the story. Truth is, Grant was brilliant. At the time, most music managers were taking massive cuts from their artists, sometimes 40%, even 50%. Grant? He only took 10%. Why? Because he knew if Zeppelin made more money, he'd make more money. Simple. Smart. Before Led Zeppelin, Grant had managed the Yardbirds. That's where Jimmy Page came from. And during that time, they saw how badly musicians were getting screwed over by labels. So when they formed Zeppelin, Grant promised things would be different. And he delivered. He made sure everything was in the band's hands. The music, the album covers, the tours, even how they were promoted. No label interference. When it came to live shows, most bands only made about 60% of ticket sales. Promoters and venues took the rest. Peter Grant said, nope, he pushed for 90% of the ticket money to go straight to the band. That was unheard of. And the promoters gave in. Because here's the thing. By that time, Led Zeppelin was becoming too big to say no to. Even the Beatles didn't have the kind of control Zeppelin had. From the very beginning, they owned their music, they controlled their image, and they made their own rules. And it all started with one bold meeting, one massive manager, and a whole lot of guts. So by now, Led Zeppelin had a killer record deal, a genius manager, and a sound that no one could ignore. But then, they started breaking even more rules. Most bands at the time relied on radio hits to stay relevant. You needed to drop a single, get it spinning on AM radio, do interviews, appear on TV shows, play the game. Zeppelin? They didn't care. No singles in the UK. Seriously. You had to buy the whole album or nothing. No radio-friendly handouts. And they rarely gave interviews. Almost never appeared on TV. They even refused to release music videos. Who turns down free publicity? Led Zeppelin did. Peter Grant believed Zeppelin's music should speak for itself. He didn't want them overexposed or turned into pop stars. He wanted mystery. He wanted fans to have to work to discover the band. And it worked like magic. Their albums weren't just collections of songs. They were experiences. Side A to side B. Every track mattered. No filler. No fluff. Just Zeppelin doing whatever they wanted. And selling millions while doing it. Their second album, Led Zeppelin II, dropped in 1969 and went straight to #1 in the US and UK, knocking the Beatles off the top spot. Let that sink in. By the early 70s, Zeppelin wasn't just big. They were a movement. They played loud, raw, and long. Some shows went over 3 hours, with extended solos that would melt your face off. Jimmy Page with his double neck guitar, Robert Plant screaming like a banshee, Bonham beating the drums like they owed him money, and John Paul Jones quietly holding it all together. And fans? They weren't casual, they were obsessed. People followed the band from city to city. They'd camp outside venues just to get a glimpse of them. Zeppelin didn't do meet and greets. There were no backstage passes, no Instagram, no selfies. If you wanted to see Zeppelin, you had to be there live. And that's exactly how Peter Grant wanted it. He believed that mystery made Zeppelin bigger. The less you knew about them, the more you wanted to know. And the band played into it perfectly. They weren't trying to be relatable. They weren't asking to be your favorite boy band. They were larger than life, almost like rock gods dropped from another planet. While other bands tried to please everyone, Zeppelin just kept doing their own thing. And the world couldn't get enough. By the time they dropped Led Zeppelin 4 in 1971, the one with Stairway to Heaven, they had already become the biggest rock band on Earth. And the wild part, they were just getting started. So here's the thing. When Led Zeppelin 4 dropped in '71, nobody even knew what to call it. It had no official title, no band name on the cover, just a cryptic drawing of an old man with sticks on his back. Most folks just started calling it IV, and that stuck. But Zeppelin? They just let the music do the talking. And man, did it talk. Stairway to Heaven wasn't a single. You couldn't buy it on its own. It didn't get pushed on the radio. But still, it became the most played song in rock radio history. Why? Because people heard it once and had to hear it again. The build-up, the mystery, the way it starts slow and ends in a full-on sonic explosion. It was more than just a song. It felt like a journey. The rest of the album? Just as powerful. Black Dog, Rock and Roll, When the Levee Breaks, all absolute monsters. And it cemented something Zeppelin had been quietly building, an untouchable mystique. They weren't celebrities. They were myths. And that only fueled the obsession. They weren't just playing music anymore. They were building a legacy. No gimmicks. No top 40 tactics. Just raw sound, insane talent, and a refusal to follow anyone's rules but their own. But behind the curtain? Life on the road was anything but quiet. Zeppelin tours became the stuff of legend, and sometimes of total madness. They chartered a custom plane called the Starship, with a fireplace, bedrooms, and a bar inside. Yeah, a literal bar in the sky. Who does that? They'd rent out entire hotel floors, roll in with security like royalty, and throw wild after-parties that people still talk about today, even if nobody remembers all the details. But here's what made it interesting. Through all that chaos, Peter Grant ran a tight ship. He might have looked like a bulldozer, but he was brilliant at protecting the band. He made sure they got paid fairly, way more than most bands at the time. If a venue tried to stiff them, Grant would show up, look the promoter in the eye, and fix it, with or without words. His presence meant Zeppelin could do their thing without worrying about being cheated. They didn't have to chase the spotlight, it followed them, and the music never suffered. While the parties got louder, and the crowds got bigger, Zeppelin kept pushing themselves musically. Each album was different, but somehow always felt Zeppelin. By 1973, they were playing stadiums. Not arenas, actual football stadiums. Selling out shows like no one had before, and for a while, it felt like nothing could stop them. But we'll get to that soon. By 1975, Led Zeppelin wasn't just a band anymore. They were a phenomenon. Every new album felt like an event, and when Physical Graffiti dropped, it hit like a thunderclap. A double album, 4 sides, 15 tracks, no filler. It was a sprawling beast of a record. Blues, funk, acoustic, Eastern influences, all of it mashed together in this beautifully messy, experimental stew. Songs like Kashmir didn't sound like anything else on the radio. Still don't. And Zeppelin? They weren't just riding the wave, they were the wave. Their live shows were selling out within hours, sometimes without even announcing a lineup. Promoters were guessing dates and praying the band would show up. And when they did, it was thunder. The crowds were massive, the sound was deafening, and Zeppelin leaned into it, stretching songs out to 20-minute jams, turning concerts into rituals. If you saw them live, you didn't just watch, you got swept up. But behind the curtain, things were getting rougher. Jimmy Page was leaning hard into heroin. Robert Plant's voice was starting to feel the strain of constant touring. And John Bonham, well, Bonzo was still Bonzo, brilliant on the kit, unpredictable off it. And then came the real curveball. In August of 1975, everything screeched to a halt. Robert Plant was vacationing in Greece with his family when their car crashed. Bad, he shattered his ankle. His wife Maureen nearly died. Their kids were in the car too. Suddenly, Led Zeppelin wasn't thinking about music. They were just trying to survive. Plant spent months in a wheelchair. Touring was off the table. The band, for the first time in years, went quiet. But Zeppelin wasn't about to go out like that. From his wheelchair, Robert started writing with Page again. And what they created next was something darker, colder, and way more introspective than anything they'd done before. The result? Presence. An album written and recorded in just 18 days in Munich. It didn't have any singles, no radio hits, no acoustic ballads. It was raw, gritty, almost defiant. Songs like Achilles' Last Stand showed they weren't mellowing out. They were digging deeper, wrestling with trauma through sound. Critics weren't sure what to make of it. But fans? They stuck with it. Because Zeppelin wasn't a trend anymore. They were a language, one that spoke to people on a level way beyond the charts. But the shadows were starting to grow. By the late 70s, things were changing. And not just for Led Zeppelin. The world around them was shifting fast. Punk was exploding in the UK. Disco was dominating American airwaves. And rock? Well, rock was starting to feel like an aging king. Zeppelin, still massive, was starting to look like giants in retreat. They weren't touring. They weren't giving interviews. They were just there, off in the distance, like a shadow of something bigger than life. But behind the scenes, the cracks were growing. John Bonham was drinking more than ever. Jimmy Page looked like a ghost, thin, quiet, disappearing behind sunglasses and long coats. Heroin was part of the picture now, no question. And Robert Plant? Still recovering. Physically, emotionally, all of it. The crash had rattled something deep in him. Then, just as they were trying to find their rhythm again, tragedy hit. In 1977, while the band was on tour in the US, Plant got a phone call no parent should ever get. His 5-year-old son, Karak, had died from a sudden stomach virus. Out of nowhere, Plant flew home immediately. The tour was canceled. Zeppelin shut down. And honestly, no one knew if they'd come back at all. This wasn't just about music anymore. It was about life, loss, and whether the spirit behind the band could survive all that weight. But somehow, they did return. In 1979, Zeppelin put out In Through the Outdoor, and just by its name alone, you could tell this wasn't the same band. Gone were the towering riffs and mystical lyrics. Instead, you got something more reflective. Songs like All My Love, written for Plant's late son, showed a side of the band that most fans had never seen before. Softer, sadder, more human. And while some hardcore Zeppelin fans didn't know what to make of it, others saw it for what it was, a band growing up, trying to find meaning after a decade of chaos. The sound leaned more into synths. John Paul Jones stepped up big time on this record. He was the glue, the quiet genius keeping things together. They even played 2 massive shows at Nebworth to promote it. Over 200,000 people showed up. No openers. Just Zeppelin, standing in the rain. Still legends. But underneath the music, the storm hadn't really passed. Bonham was struggling. Page looked frailer than ever. And Plant, though singing again, had this weight to his presence. Like a man who'd seen too much. The spark was still there. But it was flickering. And then, not long after the Nebworth shows, it went out completely. September 24th, 1980. Just another day in the countryside. The band was rehearsing for an upcoming American Tour 1 that was supposed to mark their return, a big one. They were back at Jimmy Page's house. Bonham had been picked up earlier that day. Breakfast? 4 quadruple vodkas and a ham roll. That wasn't unusual. To most people around him, that was just Bonzo being Bonzo. Loud, wild, always a few drinks in. But even his closest friends were starting to worry. The drinking had gone from party level to dangerous. That day, Bonham played like a machine, no signs of slowing. But when rehearsal wrapped, he kept drinking. He fell asleep at Page's house that night, laid down to rest, and he never woke up. John Bonham died in his sleep, suffocating on his own vomit after drinking around 40 shots of vodka throughout the day. He was 32 years old. The band didn't make any announcements right away. They were stunned, paralyzed. It wasn't just a death, it was the soul of the band disappearing overnight. No one said it out loud, but deep down, they knew. Without Bonham, Led Zeppelin couldn't continue. On December 4th, 1980, Led Zeppelin officially called it a short statement. No press conference. No grand farewell tour. We wish it to be known that the loss of our dear friend, and the deep sense of undivided harmony felt by ourselves and our manager, have led us to decide that we could not continue as we were. Simple, final, honest, and really, it made sense. Bonham wasn't just the drummer. He was the anchor, the thunder, the swing. You couldn't replace him, not with session guys or backup plans. And maybe that's what makes Zeppelin different from so many other bands. They didn't try to limp along. They didn't fake it. They stepped away at the peak of their powers, knowing it would never be the same. They had gone from myth to memory, just like that. Of course, they'd reunite here and there. Live Aid, the Atlantic Records' 40th anniversary, and most famously, in 2007, for that one-off concert with Bonham's son, Jason, on drums. But it was never about getting the band back together. It was about honoring what was already gone. Led Zeppelin didn't fade away. They stopped. Full stop. And somehow, that made their legend even bigger. When you don't have the slow decline, the embarrassing reunion tours, the desperate comeback albums, it freezes you in time. Untouchable. Eternal. The 8 studio albums they left behind still sound like they were recorded yesterday. Not in production necessarily, but in spirit. There's something alive in those grooves. And what's wild is how different every record sounds. They didn't repeat themselves. They experimented. From the acoustic ballads of Led Zeppelin III to the orchestral wildness of Physical Graffiti, each album felt like a band evolving in real time. Bands tried to copy them. Some came close musically, but none of them captured that raw chemistry, that unspoken connection between 4 guys who just clicked. And over time, Zeppelin's shadow only got bigger. You heard their riffs in 80s metal. You saw their influence in 90s grunge. You still hear their DNA in modern hard rock. From Jack White to Dave Grohl, every serious rocker eventually bows at the altar of Led Zeppelin. And of course, there were the lawsuits, the claims of stolen blues licks, the accusations of occult obsession, the rumors and mythology that grew with each passing year. But the truth? Zeppelin didn't need mythology. The music already sounded like it came from Mount Olympus. So what are we really left with? Not just songs. Not just albums. Not just the footage of Page with a double-neck guitar, or Bonham soloing in Moby Dick, or Plant wailing at the top of his lungs. We're left with a blueprint for how rock can feel. Massive, but still intimate. Loud, but still soulful. Timeless, but still unpredictable. Led Zeppelin wasn't perfect. And they weren't trying to be. They were chasing something raw, real, bigger than fame or even music. Some say it was magic, others say it was madness. Either way, they touched a nerve. And then, they left. That's what makes it hurt. That's what makes it special. So yeah, maybe they never really broke up. Maybe Led Zeppelin still lives in every teenager discovering Stairway to Heaven for the first time. Or every dusty vinyl spinning in an old living room. Or every band that starts with a single riff and a dream. Because when you come down to it, Led Zeppelin didn't just play rock music. They were rock music.